Hi, I'm Ethna from Ethna's by the Sea in Mullaghmore, County Sligo. Today we're going to make some homemade raspberry scones. This programme is called Home Cooking 2020 and it's brought to you by the Social Inclusion Activation Programme 2018 to 2022 called SciCap, and it is funded by the Irish Government and the European Social Fund. We hope you enjoy the programme, and we're going to start now with our homemade raspberry scones. So the ingredients for our raspberry scones are self-raising flour, some bread soda, some baking powder, a pinch of salt and some caster sugar. So that's all our dry ingredients. Our wet ingredients are buttermilk, and we have about 200 millilitres of buttermilk, but we might not be using all of that. Like our wholemeal bread, we'll see how we go. We'll see the feel of the flour and if it needs more liquid or not. We've also got about 200 grams of butter, and normally in a flour recipe it calls for you to squeeze in the butter using the breadcrumb method, making fine breadcrumbs with the hard butter through the flour. So I've discovered that you can also melt the butter, which is a little bit quicker. So I use melted butter, and I also use 2 eggs. So I always sieve the flour for the scones just to make it nice and light. So we're going to start off by putting our 2 mugs of self-raising flour into the sieve, and just giving it a little tap to get it into the bowl, nice and light, letting the air in. Once we have that sieved in, we can sieve in our baking powder and our bread soda. And then we can just put in our caster sugar. So we want to mix that lightly together. Now we know in scones that we're going to have raspberries in them. People always put jam in them as well, so there's a lot of sweetness going on. So I don't put too much sugar in my scone recipe, just so that you can enjoy the sweetness of the jam. With a wooden spoon, I'm going to mix that lightly together, and I'm going to make a well in the centre. And in the centre, in the well, I'm going to put in my butter, put in about half of my buttermilk. I'm going to break my eggs just to prevent any eggshell going into the mixture. I'm going to break my eggs separately into a bowl just to make sure that there's no eggshells going into the mixture. And then I'm going to put them into the centre of my well as well. With a little whisk, or if you prefer a fork, just mix all those ingredients together, keeping them away from the flour. Just nice and gently mix it. And then I put the whisk to one side, and again I'm going to use my hands. You can, if you want to, use a wooden spoon, but I prefer to use my hands like a spoon so that I can get the feel of whether the mixture is too wet or too dry. The bread soda and the baking powder are in there, so we need to do this quickly and lightly. So into the centre of the well, and start to gather your dry ingredients into the wet ingredients in a circular motion. And we can see it's sticking together well. It's nice and light. I don't think it needs too much more wet ingredients, but I'm just going to add a tiny little touch of buttermilk just to soak up the last few bits of dry ingredients. Then I have a good handful of frozen raspberries, and they're just out of the freezer, they're still very hard, they're still frozen. I'm going to put those onto the top Get a tiny little bit of self-raising flour, shake it over them, and then gently fold them into the scone mixture. Just keeping everything very gentle. Now they're just randomly placed. I haven't put 2 or 3 here and 2 and 3 there. I just randomly placed them. And that's them ready to go into the oven. So I have my scone dough all mixed up, the frozen raspberries all gone through randomly, and now I have a small bowl with a little bit of flour and a scone cutter. So you can use the fluted cutter or the normal one. I put it into a little bit of flour so the dough doesn't stick, and I cut through the mixture, and then I just gently make it into a round shape. I do exactly the same one. I have a baking tray ready here with some baking parchment paper, and I do that and shape it a little bit into the round shape. I don't try too hard to make it too circular. I just kind of let it fall naturally into a shape. So we're just finished placing the scones on the tray with the parchment paper. I did say that I cut them out like that, but obviously if you don't have a cutter, you can just use your hands. Just be gentle, don't let the air that you've created by sieving the flour and everything out of keep it light, keep it simple. And then if you wanted to, the egg that we broke into the bowl, there's some residue of the egg left in it. Add a little bit of buttermilk to that, and you can just glaze them gently. Now, I don't always do this glazing, and they work out just fine. So, but as quickly as you can get them into the oven, which we've preheated at 200 degrees, the better, because we don't want the frozen raspberries to defrost. So raspberry scones are just out of the oven, looking very nice. You can see the raspberries have mixed in with the dough. They're nice, and you can hear the tap, they're nice and hollow, crispy on the outside. We're just cutting one now to see what it looks like on the inside, and they look absolutely delicious. So I hope you enjoy the raspberry scones, and happy baking. So if you don't feel like a sweet scone, don't forget that you can use the same ingredients except for the sugar. We're going to use the same weight in flour. So 2 mugs of self-raising flour, sieved. We're going to use a spoonful of bicarbonate of soda and a half spoonful of baking powder and sieve that. And because it's a savoury scone, we're going to use a good bit of salt and sieve all those ingredients in. Mix it about. And for the savoury part, we're going to use some grated mature cheddar. We're going to reserve a little bit for the top of the scones, but put most of the 200 gram cheddar cheese grated in. We have some dried mixed herbs, but if you are lucky enough to have some herbs either in a pot plant or in your garden, we have some rosemary here and some lovage. Rosemary is lovely and easy to grow and great for the bees. And after that, we're going to make our usual well in the centre. Mix in the flour, the cheese and the herbs. Make a well in the centre, and into the well I'm going to put a nice good dessert spoon of Dijon mustard. Now, if you had mustard powder, you could use mustard powder. If you had whole grain mustard, you could use that. If you had English mustard, you could use that. Maybe just a little bit less, because it might be a little bit stronger than the Dijon. So it's not a recipe set in stone. You could leave out the cheese, leave out the mustard. Just use any other herbs, oregano, whatever you have in the press yourself. I'm going to crack the eggs into a bowl, just to avoid getting any shells. Put them into our well in the centre. and then add nearly 3/4 of our buttermilk. And we have about 100 grams of melted butter, and in that goes as well. I'm going to do my mixing with my whisk, but if you hadn't a whisk, you could use a fork. And then I'm going to use my hand going into the center, and I'm going to gradually incorporate the flour and all the other ingredients lightly into the wet ingredients. Not mixing it too much, not being too hard, not squeezing it together, just lightly mixing it around until it all combines. If you find you have a little bit of flour not combining, that you need a little bit more liquid, then you can use a little bit more liquid to get that in. And then I have my oven hot already, 200 degrees. I have a cutter here, and I have a baking tray which I've put some parchment paper on so the scones aren't going to stick. If you like, you can rinse off your hands at this stage so they're not too sticky, or you can put a little bit of flour on them just to rub off the other ingredients that are stuck on them. And then with your cutter, you can cut a savoury scone and have it ready to place on the baking tray. So we have our savoury scones. We're just going to put a little bit of buttermilk on the top of them, just so that our cheese, or the cheese that we've reserved, will stick on the top, and they look nice and fluffy. And this is our savoury scone. If you wanted to, there's nothing wrong with you pinching a hole in one, placing a few more ingredients in the centre, and closing it up again and giving somebody a surprise, finding a little half a slice of sun-dried tomato or a little cube of cheese. You know, you can use your imagination, but and it's a bit of fun, and the kids can become involved, and each one can do their own little surprise for themselves inside the savoury scone. So as I said, we have our oven preheated. Always preheat the oven, always a high temperature, 200 to 220 even for scones, just to get them rising up. You can let it down a little bit towards the end if you like, but definitely at the beginning always have it preheated, and always for scones 200 to 220 degrees depending on your oven. So I'm just going to put them in the oven now. They'll only take about 15 minutes, and we'll have a look at them then. So I have taken one of the scones. I've reserved a little bit of the scone, the savoury scone mixture. I have a few ingredients here for a little bit of salami and a few olives and a little bit of tomato sauce and some grated cheddar, or you could have mozzarella, or even a few different kinds of grated cheese. And I'm just going to use the scone mixture. I know it's going to not be to every Italian person's liking, but I'm going to use the savoury scone mixture to make a pizza dough. So I've put a little bit more flour on the outside of the scone, and then I'm going to squeeze it out as thin as I can. You could get your children involved in this. You could, and they can make their own toppings. They can make their own shapes. It doesn't have to be round. It can be square. It can be a butterfly. It can be anything. It will go a little bit into its own shape, but basically it's the same principle. A little bit of the tomato sauce. If you don't have, you can use a bolognese sauce. You can use passata. You can use just a little bit of tomato passata with some herbs if you like. Then I'm going to put some cheese, and you can, if you wanted to, you could roll this up as well and make it like a calzone. So there's nothing to say that you can't do that. And we have a few olives, and let them spread around. And there we have a mini pizza with our savoury scone dough. So we're just taking our savoury scones and our savoury pizza using the savoury scone dough out of the oven, and they all look very nice, nicely browned. The cheese is browned on top, and the pizza doesn't look too bad. Obviously it's not the thin crust, but you know, if you were stuck and wanted to do something quickly, you can see how easy it is to do the savoury scones and how quickly they bake. So nothing to say you couldn't use that. So I'm just going to cut one of the scones for you to see how light it is inside, and nice and light, a little bit of mixture of the herbs going through there, and the pizza. I'll just put it on the plate. Put it in there. You can cut it with a knife or a pizza cutter, and you can see that would be nice even for kids' lunch, bring them to school. You could fold it over and make a sandwich, like a bit of pocket. So there you have savoury scones and savoury pizza using the savoury scone dough.